is Tiger King, Joe Exotic, Carol Baskin, is this a gift from the TMZ gods for you?
A gift from the TMZ gods. We did this show in 6 days. So
wow.
That gift, if you view it as a gift, it's a gift that almost killed me.
Right. Well, you look good at the moment, mate. You're doing well. Harvey Levin, how are you, sir?
I'm good. How's it going, Brad?
Mate, I've got to tell you, this show, you've moved quickly. What's your strategy when you want to investigate, someone like Tiger King?
Look, we do what we normally do when we're looking at something, which is contacting people, understanding the story, and seeing where it leads us. And that's exactly what we did here. And what we found, I think there were some really surprising and even troubling things that, the things that really jump out at me, just for starters, are we spoke to the sheriff in Tampa, who has reopened the investigation into the disappearance of Carol's husband. Number one, he says he was murdered. Number two, he says more than one person did it. He is suspicious of Carol and others. She is not named as a person of interest, but he explains why he is suspicious. But he says more people were involved. He is asking them to come forward, and he is even telling us that he will give some of them immunity if they can lead him to the person or persons who really planned this out. So that's number.
Yep. Sorry. Go on. Sorry.
That's number one. Number two, I got to tell you, I now, having done this, I have real questions about whether Joe was serious about putting a hit out on Carol.
Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, that was crazy as a viewer, as you're watching, Tiger King, you're like, hold on, isn't he kind of manipulated into this? Isn't it all through a number of cameras and, how Jeff Lowe's, immunity or things along those lines?
Well, I think you're raising a really important point, that a lot of people think he was entrapped by Jeff Lowe and James Garretson. But the big thing for me, we interviewed the guy who was the supposed hitman, Alan Glover, who got the $3,000. Remember, Joe says the $3,000 was to get him out of the zoo, to get Alan out. Alan says it was to kill Carol. Alan told me during the interview, he said, Joe caused so much misery to people and to animals that this was payback as far as he was concerned, and wished he could do more. Any defense lawyer who would have heard him say something like that in court would pounce on it, because it shows bias, and bias means that you may not necessarily have to be relying on what they say, since they have an axe to grind. And remember, there are two versions. Joe said it was to get him out of the zoo and not to pay him to kill her. And all you need to do is create reasonable doubt. I got to tell you, that's a very troublesome thing, had the jury heard what they told us.
So Joe Exotic had a terrible lawyer. What you're saying?
Well, look, all I know is Alan said it to us.
Right.
And I think this is really relevant. The other thing, Brad, that I don't get, and I'm just going to ask you, I know you wouldn't do it, but if you were thinking of hiring somebody to kill somebody, how many people would you tell?
No one. Come on.
Right. And yet Joe Exotic not only told everyone who would listen, but I interviewed Jeff Lowe, who said, there were times when people would just come into the zoo and he'd say, hey, I want to kill her. I'll give you $50,000. He would tell anybody. Yeah. Is that somebody who is serious about really killing somebody? And if you take that with all the other stuff about Alan Glover being biased, wanting payback, I don't know.
Poor Alan. I just wanted to give him a hug and say, Al, come on, mate, go off and have a few beers and go to your strip clubs and have a good time. Right. I felt bad for him, that guy. I mean, when you first see Carol Baskin in that show, is your brain, you're a TV producer, you're a great lawyer. When you analyze true crime, when you look at her, do your alarm bells go off when it goes back to her first husband?
I mean, look, I'm going to be honest with you about this. I'm not in that world and haven't seen that world really until Tiger King. It's a crazy world. And so when I first watched it, I had all sorts of questions, but I was just trying to take in, who are these people and how do they live? Because I try not to look at, what people do through my lens of how, I was brought up and everything else, because people are brought up differently. And, sometimes people say things based on the background that might sound incriminating to us, but not to them. So I don't know. I have now, look, I am positive he was murdered. I am positive he never left Tampa. I am positive that the car at the airport was all set up. He was never on a manifest. He never left Tampa. We interviewed a woman who worked with Joe, and she was one of the last, worked with Don, and she was one of the last people to see him. And she told me things that Don told her about the marriage, about divorce, about all sorts of things that are really interesting.
Wow. Why is this show such a hit? Like, what's happened? How did this just burst out in the time?
It should not be a surprise the show is a hit. I mean, that should not be a surprise. The characters are so incredibly colorful and interesting and out there. And it's almost like, at first you think it's scripted, it's so bizarre, but it's not. And then underlying all of it, it is a classic true crime story, that there are serious crimes that are mysteries. And when you combine that with the characters, I mean, it's obvious.
Yeah, no, it's great, mate. Well, you're a great fella for talking to me. Thank you very much, Harvey. And we'll all be watching this tonight. Unbelievable. Fox,
tonight,
9 p.m.
9 o'clock on Fox broadcast, 9 o'clock Eastern time.
TMZ investigates. I love it, mate. I can't wait to see the next follow-up to what you guys do on Tiger King.
Thanks. Really appreciate it, Brad. Yeah.